Hello, today we will be presenting our debate group project for professional issues and applied behavior analysis over the causes of autism. In our group, we have Carlton, Lacey, Aaron, Nicole, and myself, Shatika. This is my fourth semester at Ball State, and I'm currently a stay-home mom to focus more on my education. I have worked in special education for the last 5 years. We will be debating over environmental factors such as chemical exposures, MMR vaccines, and genetics on how they may or may not influence the causes of autism spectrum disorder. Our group roles consist of Carlton arguing the pro factors of environmental causes. He will be speaking on preconception exposures, gestational exposure, childhood exposures, and MMR vaccines. Lacey will be debating against him with the con factors of these environmental issues. Aaron will be discussing the progenetic factors, focusing on genetic studies like molecules, family genes, and abnormal chromosomes, while Nicole counteracts with the congenetic factors. I will be providing the introduction and conclusion to our debate. I have personally experienced this topic in my life. I have a son that is nonverbal and severely autistic. I started noticing signs when he was about 2 years of age. It wasn't until he was 4 years old when he was diagnosed with ASD. During my pregnancy, I was supposed to have a procedure done to keep my cervix closed and placed on bed rest to prevent preterm labor. Needless to say, the doctors did neither of these things, even though he had my records from my previous high-risk pregnancy. My son was born at 26 weeks, weighing only 1 pound, 15 ounces. Like any other mother, I thought this was going to be the perfect pregnancy. My son was hospitalized for the first 11 months of his life. And when he came home, he faced many challenges medically and physically. They kept him in and out of the hospital for about 7 years and caused him to be developmentally delayed. He had a tracheostomy and a feeding tube placed when he was 8 months old. He is now 11 years old and has been without a trach for the last 2 years. He receives ABA therapy 5 days a week and speech and occupational therapy once a week. We do not have any family history of autism or any other disabilities on either side of the family. It was said that his extreme prematurity and medical conditions was the cause of his autism.
Some will say that who we are is defined by the genetic code passed to us by our mother and father. Other scientists claim that the environment in which a child grows up will explain future characteristics and behaviors. While these two seem like polar opposites, many people actually support a position from these two schools of thought. Autism spectrum disorder research so far doesn't support a causal effect in certain cases yet. However, there are previous studies that show that environmental factors play a huge role in the increased prevalence rate of ASD. In other words, something in the immediate environment like smoke and aggression can affect a child's development early on. Therefore, a plausible link between the environment and ASD shows a more favorable factor. Similarly, there are other factors which can be present, such as a chemical imbalance, viruses or cancers, or a lack of oxygen at birth. When pregnant mothers get exposed to chemical conditions, the prevalent rate of autism increases significantly for the child. It was reported by Rosenthal and Fryer that 190 articles had been published in relation to environmental toxicants and autism spectrum disorders in the year of 2014. And this article was published in the 1970s. 89% of those articles had implicated an association with ASD. The potential associations with ASD and environmental toxicants were examined by Rosenthal and Fryer's research article and examined in 3 different developmental phases: the preconception exposure, gestational exposure, and childhood exposure. It was also reported in a study conducted by Coleman in 1976 that the parents of the children who had an ASD diagnosis were significantly more likely to work in an occupation involving chemical exposures during the period of preconception. The toxicant and chemical exposure during the early stages of the preconception stage shows a direct increase in receiving an ASD diagnosis. A retrospective case study was conducted through the California Department of Developmental Services. This study had analyzed the effect of pesticide exposure during pregnancy. Pesticide exposure was measured by the distance from the site itself and the residential area of where the pregnant woman lives. This study has shown that from the exposure site, the lesser distance had an associated increased risk of ASD compared to the further distance. It was also reported by researchers that during the gestational period, pregnant women who take Thalamode between 20 and 24 of gestation had a higher risk of birth defects, and the most common association of those developmental disorders is ASD. Toxic waste types have been examined, and two studies had shown that that has an association between ASD and the residential area of the child's location. A case study that consisted of 495 children with ASD had reported that the prevalence rate of ASD was a lot higher due to the proximity of the Superfund sites. This study also provided relevant information based on school districts as well. The Minnesota Department of Education back in the school year of 2007-2008 had reported that higher rates of ASD were significantly more likely to be located within a 20-mile radius from a Superfund site. Okay. MMR vaccines have been widely documented with numerous research and debates. And the controversial argument that there's a link between vaccinations and ASD. The time frame between the administration of MMR vaccines and the diagnosis of a young individual with ASD seems to have a correlation. It's highly plausible that there is a connection between the two factors. Exposure to thimerosal, and it's a mercury-based preservative that's commonly found in vaccines. Through vaccines, there's during the first 15 months of life. And it was suggested to be a significant association with ASD and other ASD-related disorders. A lot of research that I've mentioned in this pro-argument sets up a solid case in determining that the environment plays a huge role in this association of development. Commonly, each study that was reviewed from this pro-argument has shown that ASD has had the highest rate amongst all developmental disorders. More extensive research should be continued and thoroughly conducted in order to solidify the probable cause of autism.
The idea of exploring preventable environmental causes of autism spectrum disorders and other neurodevelopmental disorders has been growing. Some of these environmental causes include chemical exposure and vaccinations. I will touch base on both of these theories and explain why they are not the sole cause of autism spectrum disorders. When it comes to science, there is no question about it that immunizations are a huge step forward in healthcare history. However, even though these vaccines are helping to prevent diseases, individuals worry they may be causing other issues. Surveys show that parents and other individuals associate environmental factors to the cause of autism spectrum disorders. One of these environmental factors include vaccinations such as the measles, mumps, rubella, or MMR vaccine. Now, why would these individuals believe this? According to Rowe and Andrade, 2011, in 1998, a British scientist named Andrew Wakefield, along with a dozen other scientists, conducted a tiny study with 12 children and published a paper in an esteemed medical journal. The study suggested a causal link between the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine combination and autism spectrum disorders. With ASD on the rise and a desperate search for answers, this study received immediate reactions from frightened parents in Britain and the United States, as the press covered the news widely. Wakefield's paper had many flaws. The data was manipulated, and the findings were never replicated. On top of this, it was revealed that Wakefield had a financial conflict of interest when he was paid by attorneys who were looking for evidence to use against vaccine manufacturers. There was a retraction by most of the co-authors, then the entire paper was retracted, and in the end, Wakefield lost his medical license. Over the next decade, the possibility of a link between the MMR vaccine and ASD was studied exhaustively. No reputable study confirmed this finding. Actually, large-scale studies across countries have proven there is no link found at all. Nonetheless, overall levels of vaccinations have decreased over the years. According to Jane et al., 2015, a recent survey stated nearly 20% of 486 parents of children with autism decided to decline or delay their MMR vaccinations for the younger siblings of those children. This puts not only those individuals without vaccinations at risk, but also the entire public due to potential outbreaks. Another environmental factor thought to be related to the cause of autism spectrum disorders is chemical exposure. However, according to Raz et al. 2014, no specific environmental toxicant has been consistently associated with increased risk of ASD. The Harvard study included 116,430 pregnant women, and data was collected on where they lived and the levels of particulate pollution. No association was found between ASD and air pollution before pregnancy, early pregnancy, or after birth. Another form of common chemical exposure in pregnancy includes antidepressant medications. According to Sorensen et al., 2013, both the use of antidepressants during pregnancy and the prevalence of autism spectrum disorders has increased recently. A suggestion of a causal link has been mentioned, so an association between the two were investigated in Denmark. The study controlled confounding variables, and the results actually showed there was no association between prenatal exposure to antidepressant medications and autism spectrum disorders in the child. Although research is increasing, it is still not fully understood how or if chemical exposure has a significant effect on children's development. According to Goldman and Koduru, 2000, some research suggests autism spectrum disorders may be linked to both genetic and environmental exposures. However, there has been little effort to conduct extensive research related to environmental factors such as chemical exposure. This research is needed to confirm the role the environment has on developmental and behavioral measures. Therefore, there has not been sufficient evidence that chemical exposure or vaccines are a cause for autism spectrum disorders.
The following points prove why autism spectrum disorders are believed to be caused by one's genetics. Genetic studies in the field of autistic disorders have been mainly focused on molecular genetic studies, assessment of chromosomal abnormalities, twin studies, and family studies. Molecular genetic studies examine the relationship of neuroxins, revealed that mutation in neuroxins have been linked with autism. There are three main ways to examine one's gene. They include genome scanning method, molecular studies, and a candidate gene studies, which examine the relationship of genes and the effect on brain development. These studies have demonstrated that structural chromosome variations play an important role in autism. For example, the deletion of chromosome 16p11 is linked to Asperger's syndrome, mental retardation, and developmental abnormalities. Duplications of chromosome 15 have been proven to contribute to autism development. Also, duplications of the GABA receptor gene are present in expecting mothers who have given birth to children who develop autism spectrum disorder. Lastly, chromosome 7 has been associated with various studies with autism, language delay, and epilepsy. In addition to molecular genetic studies, twin studies provide a wealth of results which conclude that genetics cause autism spectrum disorder. Concordance among twins enables to measure heritability and determines which percentage of the phenotype is affected by genetic factors. Identical twins share 100% of the genetic material, whereas fraternal twins share 50% of the genetic material. Twin studies show a higher coordinates rate for identical twins compared to fraternal twins. Twin studies demonstrated an average autism inheritance of 90%. In family studies, which was performed at UCLA, showed significant reoccurrence risks in large Utah families. The reoccurrence risks was 8.6%. And for families with 2 or more affected children, the reoccurrence risk approached 35%.
I have been working in the ABA and autism field for about 3 years. My current position at an autism school has enabled me to meet many students who are the only ones in their families with an autism diagnosis. Some of these students have a sibling with a developmental disability, but I have only met 2 who also have autism spectrum disorder. I have yet to meet a parent that also has a diagnosis of autism, nor do they appear, in my opinion, to have any symptoms of autism or Asperger's. I will be exploring the possibility that genetics do not cause autism. Genetic studies assess chromosomal abnormalities, twin and family studies. Genetic flaws make the disease more likely, but does not necessarily cause the disease. Much of scientific evidence is based upon correlation of variables. As evidence-based practitioners, we need to remember that correlation does not necessarily mean causation. A common question is there an autism gene? Hereditary studies discuss the possibility of an autism gene. 2 popular theories are whether the cause is from one single gene or a multi-gene factor. The single gene theory focuses on 16p11 deletion or duplication. A 2008 study found that only 1% of autistic individuals had this deletion. The multi-gene theory discusses the combination of variants of genes. Other studies have shown that this theory only has a small effect of increasing the risk of autism. In family studies, results have shown that parents of autistic children are usually non-autistic themselves. Autism is said to be caused by chromosomal abnormalities at conception. Structural chromosomal variations play an important role in the etiology of autism. A concept known as sporadic autism is caused by spontaneous mutation after conception. Variations have been identified in only 7 to 10% of sporadic autism cases. Concordance in siblings is only between 0 and 23%. That's less than a quarter of a chance that the children have inherited the autism gene. Twin studies also fail to find 100% concordance. Identical or monozygotic twins share 100% of the genetic material but have a broad heritability range when it comes to an autism diagnosis. Twin studies show a higher concordance in monozygotic than dizygotic twins, but some studies found it is still only about 60% or compared to 1 to 30%. Chromosomal mutations have variable expressivity and the effects manifest differently in each individual. Spontaneous mutations can occur in one twin and not the other. If twins have the same genetic makeup, shouldn't they have the same chance at inheriting autism? The data concludes that even though families of individuals with autism may receive the same diagnosis, there is no one gene proven to be the sole cause of autism. The inability to determine one chromosomal abnormality weakens the argument of a genetic cause. Variations across family and twin studies prove that autism does not run in the family 100% of the time. If autism spectrum disorder is hereditary, wouldn't the concordance be higher in siblings? The inability to find an autism gene and inconsistencies in genetic mutations does not effectively support the theory that autism is caused by genetics.
In closing, there are many factors that can be argued for causes. Environmental factors can have an impact on these causes. Over the years, researchers have studied several risk factors over this topic. Therefore, because of the potential exposures of toxins in our environment, there is a risk of them causing autism. This is one of the reasons why doctors stress to expecting mothers the importance of staying away from chemicals like mercury and lead during their pregnancy. All of these phases of exposures are vital. A child can be affected by these issues even before conception happens. Genetics is another factor that comes up when discussing the causes of autism. Based on some of the studies, identical twins sharing the same genes are much more likely to have ASD than fraternal twins. Also, when some family members have ASD, there is a greater chance that future family members could have ASD as well. This proves that genetics are one of those that can cause autism. The incorporation of ABA therapy will be beneficial to clients with ASD by providing them with interventions that will help them improve their socially significant behaviors. As a BCBA, it will be our responsibility to educate our clients and their families over the potential causes of autism prior to beginning treatment plans. This falls under Ethic Code 2.0, Behavior Analyst Responsibilities to Clients. BCBAs are obligated to operate in the best interests of the client. This means the analyst should provide families with the most accurate information concerning the family member's needs. Thank you for taking the time out to listen to our debate over the causes of autism.